Good afternoon. I would like to call the meeting to order at 1:30. And I would like to begin by acknowledging that Jasper National Park and the municipality of Jasper are on Treaty 6 and Treaty 8 territories, as well as Métis Region 4. This land is the traditional territory, meeting ground, gathering place, traveling route, and home for the Dinéza, Nehewak, Anishinaabe, Secwepemc, Stoney Nakoda, and Métis. The municipality of Jasper acknowledges the land and these territories to honor the relationship Indigenous peoples have with this land, to remind us of our responsibility and obligations to this place, and to Indigenous peoples, and to affirm our accountability to address the ongoing impacts of colonization that continue to affect Indigenous peoples. Thank you. I'm standing in while Mayor Ireland is at Aboriginal Day ceremony, and so we will keep the meeting going until his arrival. I wonder if everyone has had the opportunity to review the agenda, and if there are any additions, deletions, or changes to the agenda. If not, if I could have a motion to approve the agenda as circulated. Councillor Melnick, all in favor? Thank you. Move on to then the approval of the minutes. 3.1 is legislative committee meeting minutes, June 7th of 2022. Is there a member of that committee who would be willing to, thank you, Councillor Hall. All in favor? The regular meeting minutes, 3.2. Is there a councillor willing? Are there any change? No changes. All in favor? And committee of the whole meeting minutes from June 14th. Is there a councillor willing to make that motion? Councillor Wilson, thank you. All in favor? Okay. Is there any business arising from the previous minutes? Being none, we move on to bylaws and 5.1 bylaw summary. And I don't believe we need a motion for that. We'll move on then to requests for decision. And that's 6.1, the 2021 audited financial statements. Are there any questions on that? Then I guess I call for a motion. Councillor Kelleher-Empty, thank you.
The council accept the 2021 audited report presented on June 14th as information, and that council accepts and approve of the audited financials of the municipality of Jasper presented for the year ended December 31st, 2020.
Any debate? I'll call the question then. All in favor? (6.2) the assessment review board appointments. Any questions on that? We had robust conversation last time, last week. Is there a councillor who's willing to make that motion? Councillor Wilson. So,
sorry. Sorry, yeah, my apologies. My apologies. I'll blame the delay on the mic only. Sorry, I'd be willing to make a motion that council will appoint Tricia Papi as the designated clerk for the Regional Assessment Review Board for West Yellowhead for a one-year term, starting July 1st, 2022, and that council will appoint Paul Butler as the designated chair for the Regional Assessment Review Board for West Yellowhead for a one-year term, starting July 1st, 2022.
Any debate? I'll call the motion then. I'll call the question. All in favor? Six point three, emergency services building boiler replacement. Any questions or concerns? Is there a councillor willing to make that motion then? Councillor Kelleher.
That council approve an updated project budget of 190,000 for replacement of the boiler and domestic hot water system replacement at the emergency service building to be funded from the Protective Services Restricted Reserves. And that council award the emergency service boiler replacement contract to Magna Mechanical Systems Limited in the amount of $177,470.
Any debate? I'll call the question. All in favor? Uh, 6.4.
Sorry, I just wanted to comment. For further items, may I ask that we just request a quick overview of the topic from Mr. Gibbon, just for people watching, if they will have the agenda in front of them, just so we know what we're talking about. If we don't have any questions, and we doesn't get discussed.
Perfect, thank you. It felt like it was going awfully fast.
Sorry to slow things down.
I appreciate that, thank you. My first time doing the actual council. The 6.4 of the JCHC governance review. Over to you, CAO.
Sure. Thanks very much, Deputy Mayor Waxer. And yes, in fairness, council had a full presentation and the full report presented at committee. And with all of these RFPs, they are coming from committee. So it's certainly not the first time that council's seen it, but if this is the first council meeting that somebody's tuning into on a topic, they may need a bit of administration's happy to do that. So the JCHC governance review is a result of the direction of the JCHC board and the increased focus on housing in the community. It's well recognized that Jasper has a long-standing housing challenge, and the housing gap analysis was intended to both consider what the gap is and to recommend strategies for addressing that gap into the future. The findings of the study and the full study is posted in last week's committee of the whole meeting, and so the full report is there for everybody who wishes to see it, along with a summary presentation that was given to council last week. But the highlights were that Jasper has a shortfall available for housing units for both seasonal or shorter term residents, as well as longer term full-time residents. There was significant discussion last week about the size of that gap, and we in the report identify a number, but I think as we discussed at committee last week, that the number is dependent on a couple of different factors. And so the number of units that you need to be able to house and the people that need housing in the community depends on how many people you can squish into a house. And so I think we sort of shared that caution that we shouldn't put so much on the specific number, recognizing that there are different types of populations that would need different types of housing. But the number that is reflected in the report at 3 persons per unit, an average of 3 persons per unit, with 687 units in 2021 is the identified housing gap, or an approximation of the housing gap in the current year. And that number would be forecast to grow to over 900, just under 1,000 units, 980 units by 2042, so within a 20-year time horizon. The report also looked at the spectrum of delivery options available to address the housing need in Jasper. And that spectrum runs the range from fully publicly led, where it was totally public entity delivering and addressing all those needs, to the far end of the spectrum where you just let the private market figure it out. The recommendation in the report that is going to need public leadership, but there will also need to be the participation of the private sector in addressing that gap. And the report also recommended some additional areas of exploration to identify the best way to structure the JCHC so that it can support addressing the gap and enabling private sector participation while also taking that public leadership. So that's the high level detail, or the high level background synopsis that I'll provide from the report. As I said, the full report is in last week's committee of the whole meeting minutes. Members of the public are welcome to have a look at that. There is a significant amount of detail and calculation that went into that report. But the recommendation that's in front of council, coming from committee, was that council received the governance review for information and acknowledged 687 units as a reflective of a reasonable estimate of Jasper's 2021 housing gap.
Thank you, CEO. Councillor Wilson.
I would take that. I saw your hand up. I think there's 2 recommendations missing in the recommendations, and I found them further down in the discussion. So I think that there should be 3 motions in front of us today.
Yeah, thanks, Councillor Wilson. There are, you'll see in the motion action list, administration has captured a couple of other items. So the committee made some direction to administration at the committee meeting. And so basically said administration will work on these and come back to us with advice. Those were related to direct administration review corporate structures that would enable JCHC to assume debt independent of the municipality, while also being able to provide some amount of equity in return for capital contributions. That's the first. The second was committee directed administration to identify the resources required to produce a strategy to address the 2021 gap and return to committee prior to the budget discussions. The third was committee directed administration to coordinate a workshop with Colliers, the JCHC board and council for the review of the report, just to get into a bit more of the detail. So those things are underway and they're within the committee's scope to be able to direct administration to do those because they weren't expending any funds or making any sort of policy decisions. This one motion this year is really about council, the council level saying, yes, this number is a reasonable estimate of the gap that exists in our community and setting that target so that the community, private sector, Parks Canada, and municipalities know what we should be.
Councillor Demora.
Yeah, I honestly originally was prepared to move this, but I wanted to, lean on Councillor Wilson having more experience on the particular board. If it was necessary to acknowledge the 687 units, but reviewing and especially getting a recap from, and I'm glad that you asked for one, saying that we need to set targets. And I think just for clarification from the document through you, Deputy Mayor Waxer, to Mr. Given, the 900 plus that's reflective of there could be a potential for 40, 20, 42. That's if nothing is addressed during the process. We could be facing up to almost 1,000 coming 20 years from now.
Deputy Mayor Waxer for Councillor Demota, yes, that's 100% correct. The report does acknowledge that there are some developments in the housing pipeline. We were able to identify with Parks Canada approximately 140 units that are sort of in some stage of approval. Those 140 units are taken out. So I mean, if they don't materialize, then these numbers would be higher. But other than that, we don't have any advanced knowledge of other things that are in the housing pipeline. So if nothing comes in that pipeline of new development or new construction, then that 980 is an estimation of what the gap would be in 20 years.
And I guess just as well to feel that that's through you, Deputy Mayor Waxer, to Councillor Wilson. Do you think that's good to have that target number on there to acknowledge it?
Yeah, I would agree. I would think we should. I think there's something to work towards. There's a marker that we can suggest. Oh, well, we've reduced the number of units needed by this amount in X amount of years, and we have something to work off of. But I think that we definitely need that. We all recognize there's a crisis or a housing gap. Yet we have to set the parameters behind that as well.
And I don't mean to hijack this from you, so if you want to make the motion, that's fine. I just wanted to make sure that I got on the agenda somewhere today because I'm naturally quite quiet.
Are there other questions, comments? Is there a Councillor Wilson?
Thank you, Councillor Moore. Yeah, no, I would make a motion that council receive the JCHC governor's review for information and also acknowledge that there is about 687 units as a reflective. Sorry, worded that wrong, but I should have just read it. That council received the JCHC governance review for information and acknowledge 687 units as reflective of a reasonable estimate of Jasper's 2021 housing gap.
Any debate? Call the question. All in favor? Carried. We move then to 6.5. That is commercial use of public space task force terms of reference. CAO, again, would you like to speak? I didn't forget this.
No, absolutely, Deputy Mayor Waxer. Just briefly, I think council and the community are well aware of the ongoing discussion about the commercial use of public space, or maybe more commonly known as sidewalk seating. The idea of patios, mostly, although not exclusively, mostly focused on commercial eating and drinking establishments on the sidewalk or in the driving lanes, particularly on Connaught and Patricia. The discussion really arose as a result of the COVID pandemic. The last couple of years, 2020, 2021, were really seen as pilot project years where the municipality and Parks Canada partnered in order to respond quickly to enable businesses to operate outdoors. And we're moving into a phase where there's a desire, I think, from the community to have a longer lasting set of regulations that would be provide certainty to businesses so they could invest in these types of installations. And as council, and again, I think the community are well aware, there's been some debate about what exactly that should look like and some challenges around regulatory authority. On May 17th, council directed administration to draft a terms of reference for a task force that would bring together stakeholders to review the conditions that should be applied to this, I think with the intention of developing a longer term strategy. The report presented at committee last week provides a bit of the background and some of the relevant legislation that impacts this issue. And you'll see attached to the council agenda an amended set of terms of reference that outline the purpose and responsibility of the task force, the proposed membership of the task force, and some of the other administrative details. This is here for council consideration and approval. Once the terms of reference have been approved by council, then administration would work with the identified parties to strike up that task force and get its work going. We had some discussion last week about the challenge of doing that during the summer season, where obviously folks in the private sector are very busy during the peak season. But there is also that desire, I think, from all parties to have some longer term solutions and recommendations in advance of the next peak season. And so it kind of does necessitate starting relatively soon so that the recommended solutions could be known by everybody in the fall, so somebody could have a chance to prepare over the winter season so they're ready for the next spring and summer season. So there's an acknowledged challenge, I think, about getting that participation, but the terms of reference identify the members of the committee would be 2 members, elected members of municipal council, 2 members representing Jasper Park Chamber of Commerce, and 2 members representing Tourism Jasper. And the responsibilities of the task force would be to recommend appropriate standard for future commercial use of public space installations. And to do that work, they would undertake a review of the regulatory and legislative framework. As I mentioned, there's a number of different levels or layers of laws and rules that can be seen to apply to this. So the committee would undertake a look at that. And they would have a look at best practices from other municipalities. They would consider the operational needs of businesses, consider the expectations and needs of residents and visitors, and consider how these can be done in the positioning of Jasper as an international destination within our unique and important national park environment. So the terms of reference are here. You can see that it's a marked up copy that incorporates the recommended changes from committee. They were kind of minor, but I think broadened the scope a little bit rather than just a single appropriate standard. It is appropriate standards. And rather than the idea of best practices from other municipalities, just having a look at how other municipalities do things and deciding what might be a best practice for us, rather than assuming that there is some best practice somewhere else that we need to adopt. But with that, Deputy Mayor Waxer, this is here for council consideration. And as I said before, upon approval of the terms of reference, administration would work to strike up that committee and coordinate that, convene that meeting for the task force.
Councillor Hall.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Waxer. I think actually Councillor Wilson brought this up last week about members and adding community members, residents that aren't tied to any of these big 2 groups. Was that you?
I did bring it up, but I was convinced that there will be substantial public consultation once the task force brings back its recommendations to council, and then the council will have the opportunity to move forward however council chooses.
Councillor Demona.
Yes, thank you. I don't want to get too deep into semantics, but thank you, Deputy Mayor Waxer. I believe it was discussed last week and maybe brought up by Mayor Ireland that he was a little concerned about the term best practices in there. So I understand that the intention's there, but in order to move this as presented, could that be worded a little differently to demonstrate what the intention is?
Deputy Mayor Waxer for Councillor Demota. I think one thing that I just point council's attention to is that there is a updated terms of reference. The staff RFD, the motion has been slightly updated, but the content of the RFD hasn't. So I think the RFD still references best practices. But if you look at the terms of reference, it says just practices. So we've actually highlighted crossed out best. So we have captured those amendments coming from committee. We just didn't rewrite the whole report. Yeah, this idea that the background hasn't changed. The committee did amend the terms of reference, and those amendments are shown in the attached version.
So they are. My apologies. Thank you.
Any other questions or concerns? Councillor Demona.
If there are none, I would like to move the motion.
Would you like Would you like to read that out or?
Sure, yeah, absolutely. I was just waiting to see if anybody wanted to add anything. The committee recommendation is what I'd like to move that. That council approve the commercial use of public space task force terms of reference. That council approve the commercial use of public space task force terms of reference as presented.
Any debate? I'll call the question then. All in favor? Motion carried. I will move on then to the Legislative Committee Terms of Reference Amendments. CAO Gibson, I'll pass that to you.
Thanks very much, Deputy Mayor Waxer. In your package, Council, you'll see proposed amendments to the Legislative Committee Terms of Reference. The Legislative Committee is one of our newest council committees, just established by Council in March of this year. One of the first orders of business of the committee was to look at its own terms of reference to see if there were any opportunities for refinement or improvement, and those are presented here for your consideration. The attached marked up terms of reference highlight the changes in yellow. Generally, they address how the chair of the committee would be selected. That was something that was an oversight in the first time the terms of reference came around. They increased the opportunity for the committee to meet more frequently if necessary. It seemed to be slightly limiting. It was and not provide that opportunity if the committee felt that it was necessary to meet more times. And then it also proposes a number of additions to the scope of the committee's work. These include the committee acting as a venue to identify, review, and recommend agenda items for intergovernmental meetings with Parks Canada. They foresaw a role for the committee to research, identify, and recommend potential resolutions for submissions to the Alberta Municipalities Conference, the Rural Municipalities of Alberta, or the Federation of Canadian Municipalities. We have an opportunity to raise resolutions, and it was felt that that might be an appropriate venue to do some of that initial work. I will point out that there is recommending in each of these. There are recommendations to council, so the committee doesn't have authority to submit a resolution on its own, but it's where the work would happen, and then that referral would come through the committee to council sort of process that we're all familiar with. And the final sort of scope area was reviewing resolutions proposed for the meetings of those bodies and recommending council, providing council with recommendations on whether the municipality of council should support or oppose or provide amendments or whatever on any of those resolutions. So when you show up at the provincial conference or national conference, rather than just going through the resolution book and deciding on your own individually whether you like something or don't like something, that there'd be an opportunity for the legislative committee to review those resolution booklets ahead of time and recommend a municipality of Jasper position to council for consideration. So again, those are all captured in the marked up document. Some administrative matters with respect to the meeting frequency and how the chair is determined, and then these additional areas of scope that are included under the purpose and responsibilities section for the committee. Deputy Mayor Waxer, that's there for council's consideration. When council approves the updated terms of reference, then the committee would have the scope to be able to do those things. In the absence of council providing their approval for the updated terms of reference, then the terms of reference that had been passed back in March would be the ones that would still stand.
Thank you for that report. Any questions? I have a question and a comment. The comment is that I really appreciate the concept of identifying, reviewing, and recommending, researching, identifying, and recommending resolutions. Also the reviewing of the resolutions. I think that can very often be missed, and it can be done in a haphazard way. And I think this is a wonderful addition, because I think it provides the background for the voting delegates to be informed in their vote, and I think it also positions the municipality of Jasper to bring up resolutions that are well thought through. So I appreciate that. And my question was, would this prevent an individual councillor from proposing a resolution to any of those bodies?
Deputy Mayor Waxer, I think two different sort of levels of response. That first would be, my understanding is that for any of those bodies, resolution has to come as a motion of council. So no individual member, delegate can propose a resolution at any of those meetings. It has to come with the force of a adopted resolution of council. So, so there's sort of that level. And I don't believe that the legislative committee would necessarily stand in the way of any councillor identifying an issue. I think it just, the question would be, where would the councillor identify the issue? You may identify it and ask the legislative committee to look into that issue and see if it's appropriate for a resolution. So I think the individual ability of council members to affect the agenda is still there. And ultimately, any resolution that goes forward to those bodies needs a council motion.
Thank you for that explanation. And I did understand the first part of it. I just didn't read the question well. Thank you. Councillor DeMora.
Yeah, and I really thank you very much, Deputy Mayor Waxer. I think I'm very grateful that you brought that up. And to add to your comments, I think it's healthy for councils to practice that, because you're more aware of what's happening in the province around you. And it's very good for relationship building in where you can help other communities champion similar causes, and also build some type of equal respect in return when you need to go to the table to champion some. You need some championshiping for your causes as well. So I found that over time that when I was a young councillor, I didn't take it as seriously as I should have and do now. So thank you.
Any other comments or questions? Is there a councillor willing to move? Councillor Paul?
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Waxer. I would move that council approve the updated legislative terms of reference as presented.
Any debate? Call the question then. All in favor? Motion carried. We move that on then to correspondence, 7.1, the private home accommodations. CAO Given, do you have anything you would like to say to this?
Deputy Mayor Waxer, so this is correspondence from a resident addressed to Mayor and Council. The resident wished to have this added to a council agenda as correspondence item, so it's here. Appreciating that it may be something that council wishes to discuss here, or you may wish to refer it to administration. Certainly we can respond to the questions that seem to be identified in the most concise way in the summary, the final paragraph of the letter. It looks like they are asking if the municipality did convene an ad hoc committee, as there was a motion to that effect in 2021. They're curious about who the members of that committee were, whether the stakeholders were invited or advised, and if that committee had any recommendations. Administration would provide that update. My recollection is that this was discussed by council, and that the discussion was really around those questions that Parks Canada had, and that those were not addressed in any sort of formalized manner, other than perhaps providing some feedback to Parks Canada at an intergovernmental meeting. But administration can check the record on those things, provide a written response on behalf of council to the resident if that's what council wished.
Any questions or comments? Councillor Wilson?
Yeah, being a member of past council, my memory doesn't, fill in all the blanks, but I would definitely support directing administration to work with council, well, with maybe past members of past council members, as well as all avenues to actually suggest what actually did occur and what our position was on it at the time.
Any other comments, questions? Councillor Keller-Hardy?
I agree with Councillor Wilson's comments. We did have a number of debate, a lot of debate on the outcome accommodations. We sent numerous questions back to Parks Canada, and we did discuss it at an intergovernmental, but we did never form an ad hoc committee. So therefore, I think we should leave it to administration to send back what we actually did do. I think it would be in the minutes of one of the intergovernmental meeting. And then Mr. Green will probably bring it back to us if he feels we need to move further.
Councillor Demona?
Yeah, and I believe I remember publicly talking about some of our jurisdictional areas, and I have a similar recollection to the conversations that the councillors had mentioned. And I think that replying directly to a few of those would make it difficult in positioning council and the community into certain obligations. So I think a little more communication still needs to take place on some of them. Although the questions were asked, some of them are a little bit more gray and murkier, I guess, to wade through to get some resolution on. So we're still working on a lot of these things collectively, and hopefully down the road we can, once we have different understandings and positions on these items, and we can have better answers, I think, or more decisive outputs. And that's just my opinion.
Councillor Melnick?
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Waxer. I'd like to propose a motion that council refer this correspondence to administration to pull together a concise response to the questions asked at the end of the letter. Once we've made the appropriate investigation to ensure we have all of the details correct.
Any debate? Do you have that motion? I'll call the question then. All in favor? Do we need a motion to receive the correspondence for information as well? Councillor Keller-Hardy?
I make a motion to receive the correspondence.
All in favor? Motion carried. We'll move on then to new licenses inquiry.
Deputy Mayor Waxer, I can speak to that one as well. A little bit further on in the agenda, you'll see the motion action list on June 7th. Council had directed administration to inquire of Parks about the status of the moratorium on licenses for new private home accommodations. Administration has followed up since June, asked that question, and the attached is the response that we received. In there, it suggests from the suggestion Parks indicates that the moratorium still stands, and that they have an intention of coming forward with a new consultation package over the next period of time. with a desire to continue to discuss this issue. And so I think the question was, what is the status of the moratorium? The answer from Parks Canada appears to be that the moratorium still stands until they make a change in their regulations, and that they are indicating that they intend to continue with those consultations in some manner over the next while. Obviously, municipal administration doesn't have in particular influence or control or insight into what that consultation might or might not look like. But the question that council had asked has, I think, been answered. And I would also just note that council had previously directed administration identify how council should be developing its municipal opinion on PHAs. So I think that motion from May 24th is still helpful because it appears that Parks will be coming back to the community and to council on consultation on PHAs again. And it will be wise for us to ensure that we're ready for that so that we can provide some input into that process rather than being caught somewhat flat-footed, maybe like we might have been the last time. So that is the correspondence from Parks and the reason that it's here today. It's in the result of that previous direction to administration to ask the question of the moratorium.
Any questions for CAO Goodwin? Councillor Moda.
Well, thank you very much again, Councillor Deputy Mayor Waxer. You know what? Again, it's not to make other people in the community or members of the PDAC board feel uncomfortable, but this is kind of where I don't have any direction or questions of Mr. Given, but just to make a statement. Then again, we've got something that is very important to the community, has a huge effect on homeowners in the community and people that live here. And we see here that once the feedback is gathered on the new package, any proposed changes to the land use policy will be brought to the Planning, Development and Advisory Committee, PDAC. And, made up of appointed members in the community. This is where I have frustration as an elected member of the community representing people where, I'm positioned to reflect what's great for the community as a whole, put my own personal opinion aside and reflect what I think the community wants instead of telling Parks Canada, this is what you should do. So again, another important situation where this should be land use planning and development should be something that the municipality has control of. Just making that statement. Thank you.
Thank you. Other questions, comments? So do we have a motion?
Yeah, I would make a motion that we accept the correspondence from Realty Municipal Service Manager for information.
All in favor? Other new business? Motion action list. CL, do you have anything to speak to in the motion action list?
Deputy Mayor Waxman, no, I don't. The motion action list is here for council information. We update this at committee of the whole, and so next week at committee of the whole, we'll have some updates for you. For example, that letter of correspondence, we'll tag one off the list, but we're not asking you to update it today. We'll do that next week.
Thank you. We'll move on to councillor reports. Has anyone got some reports to? Councillor Wilson.
On Thursday, I'll be attending in Councillor Keller MP's place, the Community Futures West Yellowhead annual general meeting in Brule, along with Councillor Moore.
Councillor Keller Herndon.
Tomorrow afternoon, I'll be attending every community board meeting through Zoom. And last week, Mayor Ireland, Councillor Demille, had the privilege of doing the young entrepreneurs and late tasting. And then judge the best youths and the best entrepreneurs. We have great potential in our future here in Jasper. It was a very delightful day.
I went out and tested some on Saturday. Councillor Demora.
Yeah, I would just like to echo that and really appreciate, I want the kids that participated and future kids that should participate. You know, like I recommend getting into that as many submissions as possible, because it's a really great day. A couple of days, we had a tasting on one day, and then we had to go, we were asked to go and judge the booths or the stands themselves on, you know, Entrepreneur of the Year and the actual stand theme and construction itself. And there was some really creative stuff out there. And I think it's getting better every year. So I encourage the participation. It's a lot of fun. And I want to see more councillor visitation next year. Thank you.
Other reports. Upcoming events. I, along with several other councillors, attended the Indigenous flag raising event yesterday, and it was very, very moving and a very important and special event. And I believe we can hear now and the National Indigenous Peoples Day occurring just outside of our window. So and hope that people have an opportunity to stop in and see that. Are there any additions to the upcoming events that got left off? Councillor Hall.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Waxer. Yeah, I'd like to add that this coming Friday, June 24th, is Nicole DeRoche graduation. And next Wednesday, June 29th, is the Jasper Senior High School graduations. And everyone gets a regular graduation and celebration this year.
I guess that takes us to adjournment. Is there a councillor willing to make that motion? Councillor Wilson. All in favor? Thank you, and I apologize for my omission in the beginning. Won't happen again.
Thank you. I'd have to say, if I may add, that if former councillor Jeannot is watching, he would applaud you for the expediency of today's meeting.
48 minutes.
That's all I say.